So the final element of my Deep Space Nine collection for this evening is a Jem'Hadar fighter. And I was quite surprised when I opened this one up because it's a lot bigger than a lot of the sort of small scale models that I normally get from Eaglemoss and Hero Collector. It looks quite substantial. I don't have a magazine for this one, I'm afraid. This was one that I got as a box only because I was having trouble tracking it down, so I had to eBay it. And obviously, I mean, I'm primarily looking at these from a point of view of displaying them rather than anything else, so I'm not too bothered about the magazines. But what can I tell you about this? Obviously, the primary sort of fighter / small starship of the Dominion, shown to be willing to make kamikaze attacks on Galaxy class starships just to make a bloody point, and fairly easy to get rid of, but used typically in overwhelming numbers. Perhaps most impressively initially in the episode The Dyer's Cast, where a proper fleet of these gets thrown against a combined Tal Shiar and what's the Cardassian equivalent? Basically, their secret services go into Dominion space with warbirds and quite advanced Cardassian, I think they're Keldon class ships, and they get their heads handed to them basically because it's the Obsidian Order. That's right, this Obsidian Order for the Cardassians, and they just get their heads handed to them basically because the Dominion were waiting for them, and these Jem'Hadar fighters pack a punch for their size, and given enough numbers they can swarm opposing larger capital ships very, very effectively. And the Alpha Quadrant species didn't really have an answer to them initially because they don't have that many ships that are in that sort of size class that are dedicated fighters. So often one thing I've puzzled about, really. I mean, the closest analogy is probably with the Klingon bird of prey, but the Romulans don't have, to my knowledge. I mean, I know that they've got a scout vessel, but I don't know whether that's really on a par with a Klingon bird of prey. But they don't really seem to have any sort of middling-sized ships, so the poor old warbirds were just getting hammered because they were too big a target basically. For that many smaller ships, but it wasn't something that they were used to combating. Most of the races in the Alpha Quadrant go for fairly large capital ships most of the time, so it's an interesting little concept, and it was very quickly demonstrated to be a real problem for all the Alpha sort of Quadrant races because they weren't really used to tackling this sort of thing, apart perhaps from the Klingons, who are not immune to fighting amongst themselves, so they'd be used to this sort of hard, fast-paced ship-to-ship combat. And I always think of this as a bit of a sort of a scarab derived sort of ship, and I would imagine that was some of the inspiration for it, because it looks like it's got pincers. It looks like it's got sort of shell type hull plating on the bottom of it. There's definitely something a little bit insectoid about it, even though the Jem'Hadar themselves are not insectoid in any way, shape or form, but might be a slight psychological thing to try and unnerve the opponent. But I rather like the colour scheme and the finish on it. It's nicely metallic. Really nice sort of coating to it. Again, sort of reasonable weight to it for one of the smaller models. So I'll just leave it there. I'll get a stand out for you to have a look at. Looks like this is one of the midship stand versions. I don't see too many of those, but I think there are some ships where the sort of the bilateral symmetry does lend itself to putting a stand right down the centre of them. I mean, God knows how many of these got taken out in the course of the Dominion War, because they were clearly being mass produced like bilio. Ooh, that's interesting. I had assumed it would just go straight on there. Ah, oh, do you know why? Do you know why? It's because I'm an idiot. Yeah. So I had it flying the other way. I used to do this with the Liberator on Blake 7 all the time. It actually flies, of course, in that direction. I was flying it around as if its back was the front, wasn't I? I've got to confess to that one because that was fairly obvious. But actually, the way the stand is, that is, of course, the front of the ship. I had it whizzing around as if it were going in reverse. So my apologies to the Jem'Hadar and the founders. It wasn't intended to diss your ship design at all. Just that it's quite late at night now, and I completely forgotten that, of course, that is the cockpit at the front there. And so actually it's even more like a Beetle actually for that. So in fact these elements at the back here are in fact kind of where you'd expect wings to pop out from on an inset, which actually makes perfect sense when you think about it. So there's definitely that sort of vibe to it, I think, and it's they're in that. I mean, when these first turned up, as I recall, they were actually capable of just cutting straight through the shields of a Galaxy class, and the Defiant, I think, got similarly pummeled the first time it encountered a few of them, and they do tend to work in packs, so they are quite effective like that. And obviously, the Jem'Hadar have no qualms about sacrificing themselves. We see these literally thrown at Klingon ships just to cut them in half. So most obviously it doesn't do the Jem'Hadar ships any good either, but one of those for a Vorcha class attack cruiser is not a bad trade-off, really. If you've got numbers, then you go for it and win by any means necessary. And the Jem'Hadar themselves are expendable and perfectly willing to give their lives for Dominion without question. So pretty threatening as little ships go, especially in numbers, and a real headache for the Federation that wasn't used to dealing with that sort of thing at all. So that will join my, I'm going to say it's a battle cruiser, I think, that I have, a Jem'Hadar battle cruiser rather than a battleship. And that then rounds out my Deep Space Nine collection, I believe, because there aren't many other aggressor races. I had to stop and think pretty hard about who I could actually put on my Deep Space Nine shelf who didn't actually appear anywhere else in any other series. And really, people like Jem'Hadar, the Breen, and the Cardassians. I mean, even the Cardassians are a bit of a mix because they do pop up in Next Gen a fair bit, and even in Voyager, arguably. So really the Breen and the Jem'Hadar are the only two that are really exclusive to Deep Space Nine in terms of opponents. So there you are. That is the end of my little spate of recordings for this evening, I think. I've got some other things to show you, which are sat in their boxes currently, which I haven't even peeked at, which is very good self-control on my part. And one of those I'm particularly keen to show you because it's been out of stock for so long that I was absolutely gobsmacked when I saw it to drop back into stock. And I will show you that perhaps in a few days' time, because I'm going to need a little bit of rest for my voice after this. So I hope you enjoy these, and I will see you again in a little while. Cheers for now.